15 to 20 minutes of speaking, and then we'll just do Q&A for the rest of it. So, how does an idea become a corporation? Something we think about all the time. And why are most corporations considered greedy and we don't trust them? So what happens between the simple idea and the multi-$100 million corporation that's for profit at all costs? Let's step back and try to understand how this happened. And this is the story of Everlane and really how we came to be a transparent company. So if you look at this, we know the basic idea. Somebody comes up with a better mousetrap. It costs $10 to make, and they're going to sell it for $20 in a boutique on Main Street. So they open up business. In that first year, sales are actually a little slow. We've got our boutique, but people aren't really walking in. So what do we do that next year? Well, we need to expand and we need to grow. So the company decides we're going to partner with a retailer. And that retailer has 500 doors around the nation. And in order for that to work, the retailer says, well, we're going to buy your mousetrap for $20 and sell it to the customer for $40. So here's where the markups begin. A $10 product, now $40 to the customer, 4x markup. In that year, the retailer says, we're going to buy 500,000 units and blow this out. Life is good, but it turns out there's a mistake. They bought too many. So we're left with 100,000 units at the end of the year. And the company's freaking out. So the retailer says, well, don't worry about it. We're just going to put this on sale. We'll put it for 30. And what happens is that day it goes on sale, the largest sales day of the company's history. And a light bulb goes off. And they realize that we shouldn't just have retail and wholesale at $40. We're going to introduce a sale channel for $30. And for those of you that don't know, when you see sales at most places, they're actually built into the cost structure. So what they decide at this time is that we're going to have this channel, and we're going to have $45 wholesale and retail, and we're going to sell a third of our units every year at $35, and it'll blend to the $40 that we used to have. And that's how sales actually work. And that year, the retailer says, we're going to buy 1 million units. We're going to expand this business. And the same thing happens. They bought too many, right? They're always trying to maximize revenue. So we get 100,000 units left over. So what do? Well, we're going to open up a new channel. And that channel is going to be called Outlet. And we're going to push things through Outlet. And in that day that the Outlet opens up, the biggest sales day of the company's history. And then that light bulb goes off. And now we don't just have wholesale and retail at 45, and then we have our sale channel at 35. What we do is we say, let's do Outlet. But better than just clear product through the way we do with sales, what we're actually going to do with Outlet is we're going to make the product for $5, sell it for $15, and then tell you it cost $30 originally, and you're getting a deal. And that's actually what happens. These companies have outlet divisions designing lower quality products, telling you they cost more to make than they actually did, or selling for more to make more than they actually did. And they're not discount versions of the original. They're just lower quality versions of the original. And that's 90% of what you buy through Outlet. And then there's the 10% that actually is Outlet. And so now we've got wholesale, retail, sale, and Outlet. And life is good, and the company does $200 million. Well, investors call in, and they want to build this business even larger. So what do? They say, well, we can help you in 2 ways. We can maximize revenue, but we're actually going to help you maximize profits, because you haven't been doing that well. Your mousetrap still costs $10 to make. So what do? They say, let's move production overseas to China. And while there's nothing wrong with China, and we produce in China, and we'll talk about why in a lot of ways we believe China is better than production in America for certain things, the cost structure goes down from $10 to $8, and so now you've got a 6x markup, and you don't pass any of that on to the customer. But it's still not good enough. And the sales actually slow down. We were supposed to hit 280 million, but we hit 250. So investors put pressure. They need return on their money. So they decide, let's move production one more time to Bangladesh, right? Why not? Labor's cheaper there. The production costs go down to $7. We don't pass any of that on. Now we're $7, selling for 45, almost a 7x markup. But we don't have time to vet the factories because we've got to move fast. And the investors are putting pressure. And we don't have the team to go into Bangladesh. And so we start, and what we do is we run a few samples. They look good. We do a sample run of 50,000 units. It looks good. Let's move half our production over, and then all of it. And then on April 24th, 2013, we have one of our factories collapse in Rana Plaza, killing 1,130 people and injuring over 2,500. And that's the reality of how this stuff happens. You start with a simple idea that turns into this corporation driven towards profit because they have to make ends meet and they have to drive results. And this hasn't just happened in the fashion industry. This happens in everything, from Carnegie in the Pinkerton riots, to Upton Sinclair in the meat industry, to Marlboro and nicotine when they sort of sold it and told people there wasn't an addictive material, but there was, to Nike and the sweatshop factories, to Enron. over and over and over again, you see companies learn not by building sort of a better system, but by maximizing profits at all costs and driving and then ultimately having a fallout. When we started Everlane, we really targeted the fashion industry because we saw that there was this massive markup that existed, and consumers didn't know what they were buying and what they were getting. And so we wanted to use the internet to leverage it and create a more streamlined system, something that was designed to be very simple from factory to customer. And so at Everlane, we actually make the product. It goes into a distribution center, and then we sell online only, no physical stores, no retail middlemen. We don't do sales. We've never run a sale in our life, only 3 years old. So we might at one point, but right now we don't. And we try to keep the system as clean as possible. And what that means is that when you look at a $50 t-shirt and see that it sells to you for $50 made in America, it actually costs $7 to make. And that's because that system got so complex that they have to support all the different channels. At Everlane, we've been able to make that same $7 t-shirt in Los Angeles, garment dyed Supima cotton, and sell it for $15. But then what happened is we needed a way to explain that to our customer, right? We needed them to understand that that $15 t-shirt was actually equivalent to a $50 t-shirt. And we didn't know exactly how to do it, so what we did is we said, well, why don't we do what no one else does? We're gonna reveal our cost structure. And we went and put up an infographic that shared the cost behind every piece of our t-shirt. So we talked about the cotton, how much it cost us, the cutting, you cut every shirt out, the sewing, you pay per piece, and then all of the other materials, so shipping, packaging, duties if they exist, and t-shirts they don't because they're made in Los Angeles, so we don't have duties within the US. And the total cost is $670, sells for $15, that's our actual cost. And it went viral. There were 18,000 shares on the internet about this because no one had ever seen that cost structure revealed. And so what we realized was that customers actually want to know that information in the same way that we did. And the result was we started doing this for every product we make. So if you look at the silk that we make, it's made in Hangzhou, China, alongside some very high-end brands, and that silk costs $33 to make. We pay the same price as other brands do. We're able to sell it for $78, which is about a 2.4x markup. And that same silk, at least the quality and fabrication, sells for $195 to high-end retailers, which is a 5.6x markup. Total difference, all because of the structure and complexity that's been built into the system. And we do this also for our wallets made in Spain, our Petra bags made in Italy, and we do this for everything we make, including this cashmere and this t-shirt that I'm wearing underneath. Everything you can see the cost structure and you can see the markup. And what we didn't realize at the time was that this cost structure actually changes the way we do business. And it wasn't on purpose. We actually did this to explain the $15 t-shirt, and then it totally flipped itself on its head. And what resulted is the case that we actually can't change our system. We can't ever build markups into our plan because the customer will know. And so if you want to introduce a sale channel and a wholesale channel, it doesn't work for us because you guys will actually know and know that we're doing this and then choose not to buy from us anymore. And if we move production to a different place and the cost structure lowers, we have to pass those savings on to the customer because if the customer is paying attention, and by the way, most of you probably aren't paying that close attention, but all it takes is one. It takes one person to notice and write a blog nowadays to say, hey, Everlane actually got lower costs and they didn't pass those on. So this cashmere, actually, the price went up about 5% this year, and we raised the price to $128. But there's complete justification for that because our cost structure went up. And that's in that same way, we've renegotiated price down because of volumes, and in the spring this will go down 10%, and we are going to pass all of that back to the customer. So we always keep markups and pricing consistent. And that's not actually, we didn't choose to do it that way, we kind of have to do it that way now. Cost structure was the first part of it, but the second part of the second part of our business that we paid a lot of attention to is the factories. Where are things made? And the frustration for us was this idea that so many companies love to tell a made in Italy story. And then it turns out 95% of what you're buying is not made in Italy. And that's false marketing in our opinion. And so the question was, why don't they market made in China? What's wrong with made in China? And so Everlane originally started made in the US. It was a great story. Down in LA, it was all we knew. But we knew that that wasn't sustainable. So what we did is, before we went into China, and as we started thinking about production there, we actually went on a tour through China, and we started we flew into Hong Kong. This was a miserable trip, for the record, because it was like literally, it was 7 days, and we were blogging every day. And it was, you visit all the factories, you do all the talking, and then you blog about it. So we started in Hong Kong to Shanghai to to Hangzhou. We visited 3 factories in one day in Hangzhou. Then we went up to Ningbo to where cashmere is spun. It's Mongolian cashmere that's flown into Ningbo, and then they spin the yarn there. Then we went down to Dongguan and visited a bunch of factories. And what we found there is that in a lot of ways, China, and I hate to say this, is better than America for production. And that's the reality. That's why so many things have moved there. And it's better not just because of the scalability, but in a lot of ways the factories treat their employees better. So in China, you have dorms that are provided. You don't have to use them. So some of our factories, people actually live in the city and some live in the dorms. Food, so room and board, subsidized. And then they have facilities where there's palm trees and there's actually like basketball courts and people can play there. And they actually have a reasonable life and they all hang out together. But more importantly is wages. And everybody loves to talk about wages. So in the US, a factory worker makes $20,000 a year on average. And the median income in the US is $50,000. In China, they make $6,000 a year. The median income in China is $4,000 a year. And they've got room and board subsidized. So they're making 50% more than the median income, whereas in the US, they're making 60% less than the median income. And so the idea that people are overworked in China and they're not getting paid well enough is crazy, because in the US, while they're not allowed to work more than 40 hours a week, you better believe that if you're making $20,000 a year, you have a second job. There's just no fucking way you're doing that. And that's like, this is the reality that we're trying to educate people on, because there's such a misunderstanding about the way this stuff works. And people love to tell the Made in America story, but let's talk about what that actually means, and does it make sense? And so then we decided that it was sort of our duty as we did this to go and photograph not just the factories in China that we use, but the ones in Italy, the ones in Spain, the ones in the US, the ones in Scotland, El Paso, Texas. Every factory, we document and we tell the story. We share how we know the owner. We share what products are made there, what the factory conditions are like. And by the end of next year, probably in the second half of next year, we'll put up compliancy reports for every factory we work with so people can just read through the whole thing, raw data. And the idea behind that is that customers should have the knowledge and be empowered to make their own decisions. And again, what we didn't realize by doing this is how this changes the way we do business. So I'll give you an example. We make our bags right now in Italy. And we started there because it was the best production. We really wanted to make a luxury product. For us, if we move to China, it is going to be so transparent to the customer that we actually have to have a very good reason. And there are some reasons we might, but if we make that decision, we're going to explain to the customer, we're going to tell the story, and we're going to help them understand why there's some things made in Italy and some things made in China. And in that same way, anything, when we move production, we have to be very careful about the conditions of the factory that we work with. And an example of that recently is a factory in China, and they're not all perfect. One of our designers previously worked at a high-end brand, producing $400 plus sweaters. And they had produced in this factory for 5 years, and nobody had visited the factory. But they had pretty low prices and really good quality. And so we went and priced our cashmere with them, and the pricing was in fact 10% lower, and the quality was great. And so the idea was, let's move production there. Well, before we did, we needed to visit. And what we found in that factory was 70 women sitting about 12 inches off the floor on stools, linking sweaters. So when you link, you have to sort of attach, this is knitted, and then this is linked together. So you link these pieces. And they are just sitting there linking on machines, 12 inches off the floor. And you better believe if you're sitting for 8 hours a day like this, it's going to affect the way you live the rest of your life. And so while that brand, that high-end brand, chooses to produce there, we will never, because the conditions just aren't right for our customer, and we're forced to be transparent with them. At Everlane, we sort of like to say, know your costs, know your factories, and always ask why. And always ask why is sort of the attitude that I've sort of hopefully been projecting towards you, which is ask why about everything you do. And it's like, it drives people insane at the company, but we'll ask why about why buttons are placed the way they are on the website, all the way to something like a t-shirt. Why do we choose Pima over Pima? And is it a better value to choose Pima for the customer? Or why does this t-shirt fit this person but not that person? And how can we redesign it to fit both if possible? It's always this drive towards making the best possible product and the best possible decision. But as we've done this, we've learned that always ask why isn't just a mantra for us internally, it's become a mantra for our customers back to us. So they ask us why about everything we do, largely because we're transparent. Ask us why down to how much profit we make. Ask us why in terms of revenue, customers, like data like that. And some of it, honestly, we choose not to share because it's not affecting their decision. But if it is affecting their decision, like the products we make and why they're made this way or why they cost us so much, we always share everything. And so always ask why started as an internal mantra, became an external mantra for our customers. But the reality is we believe that always ask why should be a mantra for people in their daily lives. And what I mean by that is like, we live our lives and we consume, and I do it all the time. But we never ask about it. So we say, what do you know about your clothes? Well, I'll ask you, what do you know about your food? What do you know about your furniture? What do you know about anything you consume? And the answer is almost nothing, right? And that's crazy. And why it's crazy is there's two reasons. One, you have no idea what conditions they were made with. You have no idea how long they'll last, but you have no idea what value you're getting for it either. And so, to ask the question, why do some jeans cost $200, some cost $100, and some cost $50? Well, we trust the brand to make the decision, and we assume you get what you pay for. But what we're trying to tell you is that's actually not correct. And an example of that is a high-end brand selling a scarf made in France for $600. And I'm not in the business of naming the brands, but we saw that brand, and it was not produced in France. It was produced in China. And what they do is they make that jacquard scarf, send it over to France, add one stitch, label it made in France, and it actually costs $16 to make. And they're selling it for $600, right? And if you knew that, would you be okay with it, right? This happens everywhere, and we're just okay with it because we trust brands to make the right decision for us. And so the idea is if we always ask why, we're gonna end up with companies that are hopefully more transparent. And the result of that is that we're gonna have for-profit institutions that actually have lower markups, better conditions in factories, and better quality. And we hope Everlane is one of the first experiments in doing that. We don't know. Honestly, we're 3 years in, and we've sort of been growing organically and trying it out. But the idea is that if we can create that better system, and hopefully people pressure other companies to have that system, we're all better off in the end. Thank you.
Great, so now we will take questions from the audience.
You can ask anything. Go for it.
So you said you keep your markup the same across the board for all your product now. It's something you kind of did with your t-shirts, and then you're like, okay, now we have to do this with everything. Seems like it was like a 56% markup.
It averages to about a 55%, but if you look, the higher end products actually have a lower markup. So our Petra bag that's made in Italy that costs $180 to make. There's one version that sells for $325 and one that's $365. They're actually not that different price. So the 325 has a slightly lower markup. We blend the margin across the two, but the higher end stuff actually has a lower margin than the lower end product or the less expensive product.
But where did you actually come up with? Yeah, it's going to be around 55 to 56% markup. Where did that number come from?
We try to run the business to a 35% contribution margin, so a 38% contribution margin. Once you back out our cost of fulfillment, credit card fees, and everything, you get to about a 56% on the top end for the product. As returns go up in our business, we'll actually have to increase the margin to subsidize for returns. So you can think of everything as like a trade-off. So, hey, do we want a better return policy? We can build that into our product. We just have to raise prices or figure out the way to do that, and then offer a better return policy. It's all blended. We just try to run a 35% contribution margin.
Can you talk about reaction of other retail or brands and sort of how you've been perceived by your competitors? Because I feel very enlightened after listening to you, and I don't think I'll look at private label brands the same way I did.
You shouldn't. But the reality is that I actually think it's still okay to buy those other brands. We don't make jeans, so I buy jeans from a brand called Acne, and they cost $200. But I know what I'm buying, right? I know that they cost $40, $50 to make, and that's fine, or they cost $30. I think it's important to understand informed decision is the right decision versus no information. To answer your first question, why? What is the reaction? I think people are sort of starting to pay attention. Honestly, we don't talk to that many people, largely because we don't rely on anyone for our own success. We don't have retail partners, so we are completely within our own destiny. We've heard people say it's interesting, but I don't think until we're a multi-$100-million corporation, and honestly, until people start asking other companies, I don't think people are going to pay that much attention. That's the truth. But I think our customer loves it a lot, and there is a certain customer who loves it.
So I see that you're able to regulate pretty well what's going on in the factories that sew the garment together. I'm curious about your ability to look into the factories that are making the buttons, are making the raw material, the cloth, the zippers. Is this something you think is feasible for Everlane to look into, that is feasible for larger companies to look into? And is that something that you think the customer is interested in knowing, or if they're okay with just knowing about the garment
So-
factory sewing thing?
So it's a nuanced question. So the first one is, are we really good at vetting our factories right now? We're okay at it. We try to work with factories that work with premium brands that we respect, but we also try to find partners and owners that really respect the people that work there. So if you look at our factory that produces our twill bags in Dongguan, China, the factory owner himself, they only work with 3 other brands, and the factory owner himself designed the dormitory and eats at the canteen with the workers when he's there visiting. And so like that to us is a real sign of somebody who's looking for a partnership and wants to treat workers well, who we can trust. And you have to find that partnership with the owner first, because you're not there every day. We just hired about 2 months ago a quality assurance person who spent 20 years working for Intertech. It's a third-party firm that does auditing, and they do testing and all of that. So that's the honest truth about what we do and how we pay attention to it. But we visit factories multiple times before working with them as well. And then in terms of what she's asking is there's tiers of supply. So there's your actual construction, and then there's materials, and there are different tiers. The reality is where materials are made, they're not very labor-intensive places. So if you go into the mill, there's 50 people working there, and they're producing tons and tons of cashmere because it's incredibly automated. So if you're going to put your resources towards labor and figuring out how factory workers are treated, it actually doesn't make a ton of sense to spend time looking at that second tier of supply, because there's just not that much labor there. It might be something we do at one point, but we have to pick and choose where we spend our time, and we probably spend it on environmental before we spend it on the second tier supply.
Do you imagine that in the future you would also extend this radical transparency to like your bankers and your accountants and sort of suppliers of other parts of your business rather than just the input?
I wish I had our catalog in front of us, and on the back of that catalog it says what our cost was to make that catalog. Thank you. So, thank you very much. First catalog. You want to know what this catalog cost us? Well, the talent and the R&D was 11 cents. So you have to multiply out by how many we actually made. We made 450,000. So a catalog actually only costs like 50 to 70 cents to make and ship. So we do say paper and ink here costs 17 cents. So you can actually see parts of it. We don't, on the accountant level, we do accounting in-house. We do almost everything in-house except for our pick, pack, and ship and our construction, or the actual production. So we could do it for our pick, pack, and ship. We don't right now.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and I see that it is a business that kind of markets itself, which is amazing. Like, you go on the website and you really understand what's going on. But I wanted to know what else you guys did to break into such a hard industry, to break into such as fashion.
I think it's mostly story. I mean, like, we didn't, so when you say fashion, right, like what does that mean and what does it mean to break into it? So nowadays you can just open up a website and start selling things, right? And Everlane has this, we started with 3 t-shirts, so that's it. We had a crew neck, a v-neck, and then a v-neck for women. And can you imagine ever launching a brand with that in a physical store? No way. But we were able to do it because we had a very low markup, and we explained that. The first line was actually, your designer tee sells for 8 times what it costs to make, not at Everlane. That's what we started with, and that has sort of held true in terms of the markups all the way. And the interesting thing about this is, like, if you think about the markup, we started with a $15 t-shirt, and now we sell a $365 bag. There are almost no brands that are able to start that low and move up the value chain. It's almost unheard of. And we didn't know if it would work, but it actually works because our value has stayed the same to the customer. So when people think, oh, a $15 t-shirt brand can't sell me a $350 bag, that doesn't make sense, I'm not going to trust them to make that. Well, the customer trusts us because of that markup structure, and they can see that they're actually still getting value. But honestly, the way we do a bunch of marketing, I happen to still run marketing, and it's 90% organic. We don't do paid. We just shut our paid program off, for the record, because it wasn't profitable. So it's word of mouth, it's press. We've had some celebrity stuff that's worked pretty well. People have liked the product a lot, and it's just been a piece by piece, I think, authentic story. Like, and when we make mistakes, we tell people, and it's just hopefully that's what's working. I don't know. It's working for the time being.
My question is kind of in line with that regarding the attention span of consumers, because I feel that a lot of companies assume that their customers are not sophisticated, that they have a Twitter-linked attention span, and that a story such as this wouldn't be able to come across. So is this just a fundamental difference of beliefs between the way you see consumers and other companies, or is it in the way that you've approached it that's allowed you to be successful?
Our major cities where we sell is Manhattan, then Brooklyn, then San Francisco, then Chicago, then I think it's Los Angeles, then DC, then Portland, then Austin. So we're in incredibly urban, developed, highly educated markets. Our customer listens to NPR and shops at Whole Foods. So yes, there's a set of customers that do not give a shit about what we do. That's totally fine. We are not for everyone. We still actually offer a very low price, and that's, I think, hopefully what we're still trying to do is, like, if they don't care, at least we still sell a $15 t-shirt. Like, they can afford that most of the time. But we've had people on our Facebook be like, oh, your stupid ass $15 t-shirt, I can buy a 3-pack at Target for $15. Totally fine, not our customer.
Given your customer base, has there been pressure to increase environmental transparency?
Not yet. The way we approach it, so you can't do everything. We're 45 people, and you can't do everything. So you have to pick and choose your battles. We are right now focused on improving the actual conditions of factories, and we haven't been in a place to actually invest money into it. For the first time this year, we're going to put $30,000 to $50,000 to work in one of our factories and improve the facilities. But in environmental, it's really complicated, and it's really expensive, and it requires a lot of upfront R&D. So we're so far away from that. What we try to do from an environmental standpoint, and what I think is more impactful, and we haven't studied this because we can't pay some firm to do the studies, but is making product that lasts longer, right? If you look at this chart, it's a fascinating chart of like how many piece of clothes the customer buys today per year versus 40 years ago, and it's like it's gone up by 2x basically, and that's because clothes is lasting less and it's gone down in price. And the idea for us is if we can make clothes that last longer, then that's actually impacting the environment in a positive way, and that's all we can do right now. Where to begin?
Do you guys think much about how you would have to change the factory conditions in the U.S. in order to consider potentially manufacturing product?
The question is how you would have to make the factory conditions in the U.S. work. Automation. There's no way to do it because labor supply is just so expensive here. I guess the question is like why? To what end, right? Like who are we giving jobs to? Because a lot of these people actually now, they're better off driving Uber and making money by driving their cars all day and getting a check from Uber that's going to be less work and make them more money. And so to me, that's a way better job than working in a factory. And if we can produce stuff overseas for a better price and actually have better conditions, why are we subjecting people here to do that as well? So, I mean, Apple's starting to produce here in the US, and that factory is like almost all automated, right? They're not moving the iPhone production here because that's actually, there is a lot of labor involved. They're moving the automated part here. And the stuff that's expensive, because shipping stuff overseas, right, when you produce it and then you ship it on a boat all the way over here, that costs a lot of money too. So it makes a lot of sense to take something that's automated and heavy and produce it here.
You talked about how you've kind of been forced to some degree to be transparent with your customers because that's how you started.
Yeah.
Have you ever wanted to make a business decision and then realized that you couldn't actually justify it to the customer? And how did you do that?
I mean, we'd love to be more profitable.
Like, how much does that actually change the decision?
All the time. Like, it really does. Like, I mean, that factory, right? Like the one in Dongwon that was like had the 70 women. I mean, it made all the sense in the world to produce there, except for the fact that the conditions were shit. And another brand could have, and they would have passed all the compliance reports for what it's worth. They would have passed them. They totally do, and they had the reports. It's just the conditions weren't good. And it also affects, you know, how we think about quality. And if we say, hey, we could make, I'll give you a perfect example. So we have a wool sweater collection that just came out, super soft, extra fine merino wool. And we have a Luxe wool. And the Luxe wool yarn is out of Italy. And we did that because the stuff out of China, they can't get it as fine. And so we decided that we'll buy that yarn from Italy because it's from a mill called Telenio. Because for that quality of product, we needed to get it out of Italy. But then we looked at the chunky wool collection. It would have cost us $10 more to get the yarn out of Italy, and the quality just wasn't good enough. And we also thought that it would be disingenuous to label, brands do Italian yarn made in China. So if you look at the Lux wool, we don't even market it that way. We just market it is what it is. But it turns out that yarn's from Italy, and the other yarn is actually spun in China. And it's done that way to sort of maximize that question of do we use Supino or Pima cotton. We maximize sort of value to the customer at all times.
Hi, I have a question. How do you value the design in your product? Because I saw your business model and you have a value chain for how the product costs, but I didn't see the cost of the
The question is what's what's the below the line of 35%, right? There's marketing, we have 6 divisions within the company. So it's design, production, marketing, creative, operations, and technology. And those are just people costs. Yes, we could build that in and explain all of that and get to profitability, but it's that becomes a weird apples to pears examples across companies. What we really want to just stay true to the customer in terms of marketing, or in terms of education, is really explaining what is the cost of the product you're buying and how much value are you getting in that product. And everything else that happens below that is we'll try to drive towards efficiency, but we really want them to understand the cost of this and what they're getting for that dollar that they spend.
So you sort of described your customer a little bit, and being sort of niche, but how do you appeal to the masses? So how do you bring this mainstream?
Yeah, I guess I have to be careful. That's a customer that might care about the transparency and finds value in that. So there's 2 things I'll say to that. That's a customer that cares about transparency and value now, but there is a customer that also just sees a $15 t-shirt, and that's a totally reasonable price, and it's a great quality product, and it's the best you'll get, literally lowest markups. I would also say that in our view, transparency is a 20 to 30 year game. It is not something that's going to happen overnight. In the way that organic took a long time, and it took Whole Foods to push that in a really big way, it is going to take, transparency will become something that matters to more people. It's just going to take time. I don't know who's had their hand up for a long time. I guess my eyesight's terrible.
Sweet. So 2 questions. First is easy. Are you profitable as a company?
No.
Okay. And then I guess a follow-up question to that. So it's 2.5 questions. So how long do you anticipate that will be? And then unrelatedly, you talked all about this transparency issue, and it's great, but I'm curious how you choose your next products. Can you talk about the product design process?
The problem when you ask 2 questions is you forget the first. So what was the first one again?
The first one is how long do you anticipate it will be before you're profitable?
I don't know, 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
Who knows? We run it up slightly less than break even, which requires us to raise very little money piece by piece. One unique thing about Everlane is that we don't have investors sit on our board, and so that's what also relieves a lot of pressure. So when you think about that part of the chain where investors put pressure on you, investors cannot put pressure on Everlane, so we got to build it organically, and that's a totally separate conversation. And then your second question.
Yeah.
Product
design.
Okay.
Product design. How do you pick the next product?
In the past, it was by factory. So hey, we found this factory. Now it's much more. We have a team. The woman who runs our production used to run production for James Perse and run production for another company called Aritzia, and has actually run factories. And so we can get into any factory we want at this point. And so we build out a merch plan, and that merch plan thinks about what categories are working today and how do we expand that for our customer. So next year we're introducing 100% linen tees and slub cottons and a bunch of different things. What things are working and how do we expand that? And then what new categories do we want to enter and what's the design aesthetic? We give a lot of leverage to design. So companies usually choose 2 things that they need to invest in, right? So at Apple it's like marketing and design. Those are like the 2 things they're best at. They do other things well, but those are the places where they are outclassing everyone else. For Everlane it is design, and it's going to be engineering resources or technology experience because we're an online only brand. So design gets a lot of leverage to do what they want.
You talk about transparency and sort of outsourcing a lot of your manufacturing out to Southeast Asia and China. Have you looked at any opportunities along the U.S.-Mexico border and the opportunity for near sourcing, cutting down on those costs of shipping?
Just to be clear, we actually don't. It's like we don't outsource a ton of shit. All of our T-shirts are still made in the U.S., and that's 25% of our business. T-shirts and knits. We're moving heather t-shirts overseas because 100% Heather cotton is incredibly difficult to make in the US. So we still produce a lot in the US, we produce a lot in Italy, we produce wallets in Spain, we do produce in China, and we have nothing to hide about it. Do we look at other places? We do, but we also want to think about how we can visit those factories, and so like we try to cluster things based on what they're really good at. So the US, you can still do tees really well, Italy's all about leather, and China's good for wovens and sweaters. So it just depends on the actual product. We're still 3 years old, we're going to be moving, and we're going to be changing things and adjusting all the time. Somebody who's had their hand up for a while, please shake your hand. Like, okay.
You probably have gathered intelligence about your competitors that are not acting so ethically or suboptimally in the eyes of the customer. So does Everlane reveal that information? And have you thought about going further than just giving customers an alternate choice?
What's further than an alternate choice? What's
Like
that?
Everlane itself is another choice for consumers that care about the information and care about transparency. Have you thought about maybe doing advocacy or blogging about your competitors' practices?
We don't. No, we're not in the business of talking negatively about other people. I think that's a really scary and unhealthy path to go down. Trust me, there's a part of me that wants to do it, but in life you have to choose: are you like the black knight or are you the white knight? And sure, you can go down the path and shit on people all day long, but to us, it's way more powerful to sort of talk about the positive impact rather than that negative. Negative gets old really fast. So, not gonna lie, we think about the way we tell our story and how the brand evolves. So if we're out there talking negatively, that gets old really, really fast, and it also appeals to a very young customer. It's not gonna appeal to a large demo. So it's not, let the customers, like organic, it just takes a while, but it's to us the more long-term approach to build a business. Right? We could go and tell you what factories produce there. I could tell you what luxury brand made that $600 scarf for $16. The fuck do we need that for? Like then they're gonna come knocking on our door.
Sorry, guys, we have time for about one more question.
Come on, two more.
Are you hiring?
What? So we have 45 people at our company. We get about 350 applications a week. So we are hiring, just not as fast as the applications come in. Somebody who had their hand up really long. Anyone here? Like, yeah, go for it.
Thank you for the talk. Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Have you gotten feedback from the industry, the fashion industry, and what was that like getting feedback from your peers?
Yeah, I'll answer that. She asked that question. Feedback, some, but I don't think we're big enough to make a difference. Because we don't trash other brands, we stand alone. I think that feedback is just not as like, they're letting it see what happens versus like the second we go out and talk about other brands, we would definitely have gotten a lot of feedback. And we choose not to go that path.
Well, Michael, thank you so much, guys. Please join me in